today I'm here to welcome everybody to our Dauntless LeadHERship Podcast and remind those of you who are longtime listeners that we're happy to have you back. And those of you who might be new, to find us always on your favorite podcast platform, on video at YouTube or at dauntless.works. Please subscribe, follow us, and most importantly, send me your comments. We always want to get better. So today I have the pleasure of welcoming Yvette Baez from Google, Head of Industry in Healthcare. And I have to say, when I met Yvette, I just had a feeling this was a person I wanted to spend more time with. I so admired what you've done. I am so interested in what you're going to do. And she was kind enough to welcome me in. So Yvette, welcome to Dauntless LeadHERship.
Thank you so much. Happy to be here. Thank you for having me.
So I like to start, as I often do, with asking first, what does dauntless mean to you? And then to talk a little bit about your very interesting career journey so far.
Thank you. I think in the traditional definition of dauntless, it means fearlessness. I actually live my life from a different perspective, which is to do it afraid, meaning that it's one thing to not have any fear, and it's another thing to make a conscious choice to be afraid and to do the thing anyway. What I find is that when we're in a growth mindset, which is where I always like to be at least 80% of the time, there's a little bit of nervousness that comes with being uncomfortable and doing something that's new or that's different. And that's the fear part of it. So, again, from my perspective, I like to think of dauntlessness as being afraid and doing it anyway.
That's fantastic. And actually, as I have said on many podcasts, I always look for a theme, and maybe our theme is going to be do it anyway, or, it's okay to be afraid. It's something I talk about a lot, that to be successful, you have to be willing to face into your fear, to be courageous. And chances are good with the kind of experience that folks have, you'll come out on top. And if you don't, that's a lesson too, right? So talk to me about, you have great media background. It's very interesting to me that you ended up at Google and what you're doing at Google. So talk a little bit about that, if you would.
I think of my career in three different chapters. In the early part of my career, i.e., chapter one, I started off on the agency side. And I decided very early on, at a very young age, I was inspired by Judith Light's character on Who's the Boss.
Huh.
And I'm old enough to remember that she was one of the first female executives I had ever seen on television. And I love the idea that she ran this advertising agency, which probably at 12 or 13, I didn't know what that meant. But I thought I wanted to write jingles and I wanted to manage a staff of people that wrote jingles. And I basically wrote the thesis for my bachelor's degree at University of Massachusetts at Amherst in a program called Bachelor's Degree with Individual Concentration, which just basically means that I created my own major.
Yeah.
And I created it from the perspective that I was going to go onto the agency side first. I was going to get my MBA and I was going to go off into the sunset as probably, at that point, a VP of marketing or a CMO. And so the first chapter of my career was on the agency side. I started very young at Lowen Partners, which had previously been Scally, McCabe, and Sloves in the early 90s. On the account management side, because I didn't have a portfolio. I didn't realize that in order to be a creative, you had to have a portfolio. And so I took the account management job thinking this is going to be my foot in the door. And I loved it. I loved the business side of the agency world, and I loved being able to manage the client relationships. And as I had written kind of in my thesis and in my curriculum, I went on to chapter two, which is I went and got my MBA and moved over to the client side, and have worked on a lot of illustrious brands. I started my career at SC Johnson Wax on the skincare business, then went to Johnson and Johnson and worked at Neutrogena for 5 years on everything but the face. And then rounded out my career, ironically, moving into OTC at Wyeth, which is now Haleon. So I did a long stint, about 15 years on the client side in marketing. And at one point, I was asked to come over to the media side to go into integrated marketing, which round out the third chapter of my career, which is a marketer going into media, always through the lens of client side expertise. So I went to BET first, part of Viacom, and subsequently Univision in an integrated marketing capacity, which ended up being about branded content and evolved into, really the explosion of social media. And in the end of that part of my career, I decided that the one thing that I had not done was tech. I'd learned digital, kind of baptism by fire. Clients were moving into digital, and I had to teach myself how to operate in the world of social media really being the anchor to television. What people were actually buying on Univision was the social audience, and television was just a way to garner that audience. Um, and I made the move over to Google, ironically, through the lens of my extensive OTC experience. The head of industry job at Google is verticalized or is category specific. And in this instance, the bulk of my marketing career had been spent in over the counter. Again, Neutrogena, Aveeno, I worked on T-Gel, and Neutrogena Hair, Sun and Body. And over the past 4.5 years, I've led a team of sellers at Google that focus on a portfolio of pharma and OTC brands, many well-known brands, like, again, Neutrogena, in a full circle moment, is now my client, all the way through to the RX business at brands like Bayer and AstraZeneca.
Wow, a lot of questions. I'm going to start today and go back, but my first question is, you say you lead a team of sellers. So are you approaching healthcare companies and brands to advertise on Google? And what do you bring to them to get them there? Obviously, we all know how strong Google is, but there are a lot of choices for where to spend media dollars these days.
That's correct.
Right about here in the podcast is where our listeners could be hearing your very own sponsorship message. Our subscribers are smart, talented, interested professionals. If you'd consider sponsoring Dauntless Leadership, we'd love to hear from you. I'm always available at lisa-kent.com. Thank you.
I think so. Think about the entire Google suite of products. We really deal with large customers. So they're investing a significant amount in television and in digital. And we bring to bear everything from search to display to obviously YouTube. So we do sell the entire suite of Google products and platforms and collaborate internally with cloud for our enterprise level clients.
Okay, and you mentioned Neutrogena as a client. That's a business that I've worked with. Also, everything body and face, including makeup remover wipes, and which had a very interesting downturn when people stopped wearing makeup at the beginning of COVID, and then started wearing it for meetings like this, needing to
Right.
be on Zoom and YouTube. Um, what's it like being on the agency side or on the Google media side working with Neutrogena versus being on the client side?
Well, the interesting thing is that in the span of 25 years, not much has changed, meaning that, the equity of the brand remains very consistent. The way that they go to market obviously has changed a lot, dictated by consumer consumption patterns in media. And again, the evolution to social media being an anchor, and really for a beauty brand specifically, creators have become such an important part of the ecosystem that with YouTube, we're able to provide the video solution. We're able to bring them the greatest creators on platform and allow the Neutrogena brands in this instance to have a voice that is cultivated through the lens of the creator.
So does Google bring creative to the brands? Do you bring creators from YouTube and say, yes, this is the person we think you should work with, and here's why?
Yes, we often match brands with creators based on either affinities or interest areas. We allow the brands to organically partner with creators who are a natural fit for their brands, either because they have the same demographic or psychographic, or again, really it's about like the affinities of the kind of content. So a mom who's 45 in her world, not being a mom, is thinking about perimenopause and she's thinking about her skincare and she's thinking about her beauty regimen. So through YouTube Insights, we are able to look at holistically who this consumer is and what her interests are and the type of content that she's consuming on platform, and then allow a creator partnership to really bring that to life for brands.
So you mentioned YouTube Insights, and I'll super the Google, not that anyone doesn't know Google, but I'll super the information about your organization here. Do you only get YouTube Insights if you're a client? I know that I can pull some Google Analytics just as a consumer today.
I think the most powerful piece of information that's available publicly are actually search insights. Anyone has access to Google search insights globally every single day, every single second of the day. So if you want to know what's in the hearts and minds of consumers in the world or in this country, you can look at Google search insights, and it's a really strong indication of what people are worried about or excited about today.
I've used it in the past for brands and clients,
Mhm.
thinking about incidences, conditions, thinking about specific products and services, but very often it has to do with, and certainly today with, a world political or economic issue.
Right, right.
But
Democrat.
important to know. Um,
Yeah.
for students, I often tell them this is free and you can go in and look. For clients, you bring them an interpretation of those insights and typically a recommendation. What
Correct.
do we do about it? Has that changed over the years?
It's changed in that what we find is that almost 20% of searches every day are new. Think about that for a second. We have AI, we have search has been around for 25 years, at least from a Google perspective, and consumers still find a way to ask a new question and ask it more complexly than ever before. So not only are people finding new ways to search, the searches are longer and
Huh.
the level of complexity is higher than ever before. Part of this, I believe, is directly tied to the way that we talk to our assistants at home. So, hey, Google, can you tell me what the weather's going to be today in New York, both at 8 o'clock and then at 5 o'clock, so I know what to wear in the morning in preparation for the temperature to drop 20 degrees later on? Like, that's how we ask the question when we're asking our assistant. And so, the way that we actually type a query in the search bar is very reflective of that. I also think that AI and prompt engineering is forcing
Yeah.
us to think about asking questions in a way that's so rich and so robust, that I feel like we're only scratching the surface of what queries and prompts could look like, because AI is giving us access to so much more. And in Gemini, I often go in and I'll ask a prompt and then I'll refine it and refine it and refine it, because as a large language model, it not only remembers the conversation that I just had, it's actually more expansive every time I refine my prompt.
I think that's so true. And for those who don't know, Gemini is Google's version of artificial intelligence. And it really does bring an incredible amount of rich data when you ask the question correctly. And learning how to ask the question or write the prompts, I think is something good marketers and managers really need to learn now.
I
There's
think
so
I
much
think
at your fingertip.
consumers. I
Yeah.
mean, it's not even in a business context. I find that people are like, "Oh, I planned my 25th wedding anniversary with my spouse," asking Gemini a series of questions and giving it a lot of detail about what my partner or spouse is into. These are use cases that I don't think we often think about.
Huh.
You'll usually hear people say, "Oh, I planned my vacation," but what about, like, you're applying to a job, and did you ever think about putting a PDF of your resume and the job description and anything else that we should know about you, whether it's presentations that you've done, a portfolio of work, and then asking Gemini in this instance to write you a cover letter, to write you an email to the person who's hiring to say, tell me why this person would find me a compelling candidate for this role, and use all of the information that I've provided you.
That's a great suggestion. I have one son who's graduating in 2 months, and we've been talking about how to reach out and what kind of communication to have. And I didn't think to suggest using AI to help you match the qualifications for the job to what you've done so far, identify strengths, but also where are their holes, things that you can fill now so you're prepared as you go to talk to these companies or organizations going forward. It's a great suggestion. Every year I get together with all my high school friends, and that's the first weekend in May. And I was just thinking about what should we do together, and I didn't think to ask artificial intelligence, and I definitely will do that because I like to have not everything organized, but you know me, I like to have a lot organized for a couple of days of 12 people together. So,
I
um,
uh, I worked on an AI project for Walt Disney World, and I gave them an example of I want to go to Epcot. I don't have any children. I love food and I love wine. Can you write me a 2-day itinerary at Epcot in the month of April? And when I did that, it said there's actually a food and wine festival happening right now at Epcot Center that
huh,
pairs food and wine at every country within Epcot.
no way.
It really during the time that I was there, it was for myself, by the way. During the time that I was there, I happened across this food and wine festival that I otherwise would not have known about had I not asked Gemini about it.
You have, switching gears just a little bit, an incredible background of being on the agency side, the brand side, and now on the, I guess, supplier tech side. What can you compare and contrast a little bit? Would you still recommend somebody coming out of school goes to an agency? That's a tough life right now, but I think really a great learning ground still. But I'd be curious about your perspective. What are the key differences? And if you had somebody graduating, a lot of the listeners are just graduating school or thinking about a career change, what would you recommend?
Well, I think the first thing to acknowledge is that I don't think very many young people coming out of college think of media holistically as a career path.
Mm,
I think the industry has not done a good enough job about making ourselves a compelling opportunity and or alternative for a lot of young people coming out of college. You know, in our world, there was the sciences or there was the arts.
yeah.
And the world of media really is the perfect intersection of both of them, right? Whether you're on the agency side, the client side, or on the supplier slash vendor side, what we do is equal part science and equal part art. And I think that's why it's hard for colleges and universities to tee up tech and media as kind of a career path. I mean, I grew up in a world where everyone was either like an English major or everyone was like an accountant or going into finance, and there was nothing in between.
Me
And
too.
so, yeah, I think we've struggled a little bit as an industry to articulate our value to current college graduates. Um, I think one of my clients asked me the other day to make the distinction between being on the client side and being in tech. And the way that I could articulate it is that when you are on the brand side or on the media side, your world is very finite, right? There are these media options, there's this amount of outlets available to us, whether it's linear or digital. When you're in the world of tech, it's infinite.
Mm,
Every day there's a possibility to learn something new, and just simply because the technology moves so quickly that just when you think you've perfected and excelled at learning one thing, it changes in the span of 24 hours. Going back to AI, I mean, we've seen the technology as an industry evolve 12, 15, 25 times in the last 6 months. And
wow.
so the thing about this side versus the other side, whether we're thinking about the agency or the client side, is that you're dealing with a set of variables that are known, right? Even as a client, like I had a P&L, I had a certain budget, I had a media agency, I gave them the marketing brief, and I said, go find me a media strategy and come back that helps me achieve these objectives. But on the tech side, it's a completely different ball game. It is the epitome of working always in a growth mindset because nothing is ever the same from day to day.
Mm. And that's got to be a little scary, but
I
also really exciting.
That's where the imposter syndrome, I think, was born. This idea of never knowing enough, I think, is what really has driven the idea, which is a real one, of imposter syndrome, especially in tech.
Do you feel when I joined a tech platform organization, it was called netgrocer.com, and we were building kind of the plane as we were flying it. Do you feel like that's still true for Google? That what we imagine then, in 48 hours we can do?
Yes. I mean, this company was built on the desire to break things and break them fast. So what's amazing to me is that 25 years later, that culture is still very persistent at Google. You generally find that a lot of companies, as they become more mature, as they become more, to become larger and they become more bureaucratic, that you lose that essence of innovation. And I think what drives people to be Googlers is this idea that I'm constantly wanting to solve a problem or create an opportunity. It really takes a certain kind of mindset and personality to thrive at this company.
That's a great transition to talk about leadership and what do you look for in folks coming into Google, but generally in terms of potential leaders. I know you nurture a lot of women, a lot of people. What do you look for? And what do you look for specifically to succeed at Google, but more broadly, what do you see in people that makes you think this person's going to be a good leader?
I mean, you have to have a natural curiosity for how things work, why they don't work, what is possible. Um, the thing that I love the most about working at Google is that if you keep asking the same question, you will ultimately find somebody who will be compelled to answer it. We are people who don't like not knowing things. That is our nature. And so as a business partner, I love that I have a series of collaborators internally that I can say, I've got this problem. And they're like, let me think about it. And then they'll say, go talk to Lisa. And Lisa will go say, go talk to Brian. And Brian will say, go talk to Robin. And Robin will come back 6 months later and be like, I figured it out.
Hmm.
There's not been a question that I posed that someone didn't say either, it can happen, but it can't happen now. It can happen, and here's how. There's never a finite, it can't happen. It just hasn't happened yet.
That's pretty amazing in thinking about other companies that I work with or have worked with. It's often about making a decision, either we're going to do it or we're not. It sounds like at Google, it's we'll find a way.
That's correct.
And given that, are you happy that you're at Google today? And back to the question of where should people start out? Does it matter? And curiosity is again a very common theme for leaders that I've spoken to, like you, in looking for that in emerging leaders. So beyond just asking the question why or how does someone demonstrate that to you?
I think one of the biggest challenges that we have as human beings and business people is that we ask the question and then we don't stop to listen. Right? So
Huh.
you have to have a natural curiosity, which we talk a lot about discovery at Google. It's like getting really curious about like what is keeping your client up at night? What are the things that they want to happen now? What are the things that they want to happen 3 years from now? Ask the question and then shut up and listen. The shut up and listen part is the harder part than asking the question. Any of us can be curious, but do we have the self control and the active listening ability to then actually sit down and listen, not with the intent to respond, but just because I really want to understand, like, what are your motivations? Because then and only then, as somebody who is in a client service capacity, like what I do really is I service and consult with the largest clients that we have in the healthcare space. And so my job is really to ask the questions and then just simply listen. I can't bring you a solution if I'm not listening to the answer.
I feel like partly why I started this podcast is to do more listening. It's always an opportunity for improvement for me. I feel myself wanting to respond before people even finish asking the question. How do you learn that? How do you learn to sit back, shut up, and listen?
Like everything else, it's practice. It's not formulating the response while you're asking the question, which many of us do. It is literally allowing yourself to be engaged, not distracted. Look for signs of vulnerability or frustration, and then ask again. Like, Lisa, I heard you say that this is really frustrating for you. Tell me more about that. Like, what can we be doing differently to ease some of that frustration? I hear your frustration. I'm sorry. Wasn't my intention. Let's talk about what better looks like.
I think that's really good advice for relationship and for work relationships and work communication. I just had a quasi retirement party, and folks gave me books to read. And some of those books were about listening and conflict resolution. And they know me well, and they know that's something that I want to work on. One of the women who worked for me during the time that she worked for me, because I don't know if you know, the company was for women to work part-time flexibly. She became a marriage and family counselor, and she wrote a book about turning conflict into connection, and gave me that. So that was helpful. I can't wait to read it. And so curiosity, asking the question, sitting back and really listening to the answer and rephrasing when you hear. So active listening, we learn that as active listening. What I'm hearing, what I hear you feel, and it's about them, not you, right?
Correct.
Um, when we think about doing that well, do brands do that well with their consumers today?
I mean, I think that a very small minority do. I think part of the challenge is relinquishing control. If you see brands that do it exceptionally well in social in particular, it's because they allow the conversation to be driven by consumers, even at their own peril sometimes. You can't want to control the conversation and allow consumers to tell you what they really think about your brand. It has to be both. And there are certain brands that have created a really real time voice for themselves on social that can be at times very risky. You know, immediately I think of Oreo, I think of Wendy's. Like they've cultivated really unique voices on social media. They're not afraid of the criticism. They will quirkily respond back to a post that was intended to be, you know, negative or critical. They allow it to just go with the flow. And so I think that part of allowing your brand to resonate and really connect is about relinquishing control. Because if you want to be a part of the conversation in any forum, much less social media, you have to be willing to hear the good, the bad, and the ugly.
And I hear you say, and have a voice, have an authentic voice
Mhm.
as a brand, which I'm not sure. How do you coach RX or pharmaceutical products who are afraid that they'll have to report adverse reactions, to be authentic and to really listen to their patient base or consumers? Or can they not do that yet?
They can. There's a great example of an aesthetic brand in our portfolio that uses the comment section in YouTube to inform their communication strategy. So if they see a lot of comments bubbling up about fears associated with needles, they'll in real time using AI develop creative around this fear of needles, right? Like, don't worry about it. There'll be an anesthetic that'll be applied topically. So the listening piece of it can have direct implication to how you show up as a brand and to your marketing strategy if you're using it correctly and effectively.
That's great to hear. I think there are a lot of, especially pharmaceuticals, but not just pharmaceuticals, brands that are afraid to lose control, or as you said, relinquish control. And that's the way that media works today, and social media. You really don't have a choice. You're going to lose control whether you want to or not. So might as well embrace it. Um,
And I think that the pharmaceutical industry as a whole too is under a lot of pressure in this current moment. Not to turn this into a political conversation. And I do think that there's a place for it because at the end of the day, what we're talking about is in many instances life-saving drugs that have the ability to change and save people's lives. So I do think that the pharmaceutical industry has a level of responsibility that, for instance, cosmetics does not. Right.
yeah.
And so most of our advertisers, just like we do as a company, they take that responsibility seriously. And there's an incredible amount of pressure to comply with legal and regulatory. And there's still a subset of pharma brands that do it well because they focus not on the condition, but they focus on the patient. You know, none of us is defined by cancer or by psoriasis or by Crohn's
Mhm.
disease. Um, there are patients and there are people that are also living with that condition. And as somebody who's a breast cancer survivor, I don't see myself being defined by breast cancer. There is the way that I live that has nothing to do with that diagnosis and treatment that defines me as a woman, that defines me as a mother, that defines me as a business person, right? And I think that when you're thinking about targeting in a category like pharma, you have to be thinking not just about the patient, but about the person and the empathy and connectivity that you want to create, particularly when I'm not thinking about my condition, right? Because in the morning, I'm thinking about going to work. In the afternoon, my kids are calling me about things that are mundane. In the evening, I want my me time. And all I want to think about is like my beauty regimen and getting enough sleep and water. And so I think the smarter advertisers know that you've got to connect with me at the right moment and in the right tone and with the right voice.
I agree. I also suffer from a chronic condition. I have multiple sclerosis, but I don't define myself as a person with MS. I happen to have lots of consumption needs as a potential patient and as a consumer. And oh, by the way, my MS medicine is a part of my regimen, and the side effects of it are something I need to be aware of and manage around. But that's it.
That's right.
That's not driving my decisions. And I think that uniquely in the category of MS, some advertisers have done a nice job of recognizing that it's a part of my life, not the definition of my life. Um,
Agreed.
you do, as I said, a lot to bring leaders up. And I've seen you do that. How I met you was speaking on a panel at the Consumer Health Products Association. You give a lot of yourself. This is not intended to be political, but this is a challenging time for thinking about helping women and people of diverse backgrounds. And how are you continuing to do that? I don't even know what the future holds for a podcast that's called Dauntless LeadHERship.
Right, right. I think this idea of DEI has been wildly misconstrued, and my intention is to continue to support women of all shapes, colors, sizes, ethnicities, and races. I mean, one of the most prolific women in my life, when I was 21 years old, was a very wealthy white woman who grew up in Connecticut, who had done really well for herself in the agency business. And I am a child of immigrants. I was the first person to go to college. No one in my family had ever worked in corporate America. And there's certain cues that no one ever taught me. And yeah, maybe to my 21, she might have been 27. And I remember one day she pulled me aside and she said, do you mind if we go shopping? And I said, oh, you want to take me shopping? Sure. And she said, so here's the thing. There is a certain code of attire that is appropriate in the workplace, and I feel like you could elevate your brand if you aligned a little bit more with that dress code.
Interesting.
Think about how much she put herself at risk by having that conversation with me. And I was completely humbled and didn't feel, I mean, maybe a little bit of shame, but I think more than anything, um, I felt so fortunate that I had somebody that saw something in me that would invest in saying to me, "Let's go to Ann Taylor and buy a skirt." This is how old I am. A
Mhm.
skirt, a blazer, and some slacks, and a white blouse. And I remember spending $200, which at that point was unheard of that I could spend that much in one shopping trip. And it really saved, number 1, it taught me a huge lesson in terms of, like, how you show up and how perception can be reality when you don't, hold up to certain cultural norms in business, because it does diminish your brand, right? And also, I am forever grateful to her that she took the risk because I could have been, hostile, I could have been, offended.
Mhm.
The response that she could have anticipated from me could have been a whole host of things, and what it did actually was it cultivated a relationship of deep mentorship and trust. And I want to be that person in some young woman's life. I hope that, throughout the course of my career, I have been that person for women, men, for women of color, for women, white women. Um, I want to be a voice for how can I help? And if there's something that I can offer you within my network, what is that?
I love that you mentioned cues because I do think that's part of our job as having done what we've done in business is making sure people that follow us see the cues and
Yeah.
are told the cues that they may miss. Be maybe because they grew up during COVID and now they have to go to an office. I mean, it could be as simple as that. How should people be thinking about networking now?
You want to assemble a board of directors more than create a network. My board of directors has somebody who consults me on finance, somebody who consults me on my own development, i.e., my executive coach, someone who is, it's really important, I think, for women of color to have a white man on their board of directors.
Hmm.
I have a very affluent, very successful white man on my board of directors that I call for things related to how to negotiate the best possible package when I'm taking a new role. Um, I have identified certain pillars that are critical to me, and I've identified a sponsor in each of those areas, and that is my board of directors.
So assembling your own board of directors, is this something people can do at any phase of their career?
Absolutely. You can do it when you're 15 and you can do it when you're 51. The board of directors looks different for a 15-year-old than it does for a 51-year-old, right? And by the way, I think your question is a really interesting one because I think you need to evolve your board of directors based on the space that you occupy and what's important to you at any specific part of your life. When my children were young, my board of directors was my au pair and my nanny and my mom. And now that as an empty nester, my board of directors looks completely different. It's my financial advisor because I'm constantly thinking about retirement. um, so I think it's okay for your board of directors to flex and to evolve based on what you need at any given point in your life and in your career.
I I I think that's good feedback for me too, thinking about now I'm entering this next phase of my life. I'm not running actively Flex Force or Illuminations anymore. Who should be advising me and what does that board of directors look like? And that's why I say love these podcasts. I always learn from the incredibly talented people I'm fortunate to have on the podcast. And I want to make sure I take advantage of that and ask you, what kind of podcasts or books should we be reading or listening to right now? Things that have struck you as helpful.
So we are entering an era of intense competition in the industry, and I think AI is the catalyst for it. And recently, the head of sales here at Google introduced The Infinite Game by Simon Sinek. And I had read it before, and they do some really amazing work around the infinite game. And for anyone who doesn't know Sinek, he just his body of work is outstanding for business and personal. But there was one element of the infinite game that Sean Downey really double clicked on, and it was the idea of worthy rivals. Um, and I'd like to be able to apply this for a second in the context of marriage. The infinite game is different than a finite game. In a finite game like baseball, you know the players, you know the rules. In an infinite game, the players can change every day and the rules can change all the time. And so if you think about a marriage, one could argue that a marriage is in its very essence supposed to be an infinite game. And so the worthy rival could be this person that your partner finds compelling. And, our human instinct is to say, well, why is she better than me? What about her do you find so interesting? And we get jealous. It's a natural human reaction. Well, what Cynic tells us is that the role of the worthy rival is not for us to envy them, it is to learn from them.
Hmm.
And so that by studying your worthy rival, you're actually thinking, what is it that they're doing well that I can learn from? What can I glean from what they've been able to do? That mindset shift is really, really powerful. If instead of being envious of the woman that your husband or your wife finds compelling at work, what if we got really curious and said, well, honey, why is she so funny?
Yeah.
Like, what about her jokes do you find so like, you're always like, "Lisa's so funny," and like, "What about Lisa?" Like, let me get really curious about that as opposed to being like, "Oh, I hate Lisa." Um, and in the world of business, it's no different. Like, we could sit back and, you know, hate TikTok or hate Meta, but the reality is that everyone is there's space for everyone. And in this infinite game, some of us didn't exist 25 years ago. Most of the competitors in the industry didn't exist 25 years ago. And I love the idea that introducing this notion of, in order to be in the infinite game, you need to be learning from your worthy rival at every single second and at every pivot. Now I'm
Uh,
really interested in what TikTok is doing. Like, I want to know more.
as we should be, right? What they're doing something right. And if we don't learn from it, we're just gonna pay the price. I just did a talk actually to junior managers, and I showed a clip from Simon Sinek too, kind of really focusing on the heart of why. But I haven't read this book, so I'm gonna super the Infinite Game by
Mhm.
Simon Sinek. It so
Yes,
people can maybe take a read or listen to him. He's all over YouTube. He's known as an optimist, and I like that a lot too. I
too.
think that looking even fearfully a bit into the future, we should always be optimistic about what can come of it, and it makes it much more fun to learn if you're thinking positively
Great.
versus negatively. So, what do you do for fun? I know you go to a dance class.
I was just gonna say, I think on my tombstone it's going to say Yvette's heart belonged to the dance floor. When I'm dancing, I feel free, I feel uninhibited, I feel like I can be my whole self. Obviously, there's the physical component of like the exercise and the cardiovascular benefits, but there's something about it that just makes my spirit soar, which is why I've gravitated towards dance formats for exercise, because it kind of melds together interests that I have, which is obviously I want to be physically fit and I want to be able to dance while doing it. So I want my kids know this, that, when I die, I want there to be a big dance party in my memory, and I want my ashes strewn across the dance floor and for everyone to literally dance above me.
That's
Um,
awesome.
mhm.
Awesome. I bought a URL called the Celebuneral because instead of having a funeral, I want to have a Celebuneral, and it sounds like so do you.
I definitely want to sell a funeral.
Yeah. Well, I made it a word, so feel
I love it.
Anyway, I have taken a lot of your time. I am so, so honored to have had you on the podcast, Yvette. And for anybody out there who's thinking about really creative ways to market and advertising their brands, you should talk to Yvette and her team. And I'll end today's podcast by, as I always do, citing the immortal words of my mom, Arlene Barnett, who says, "You don't have to know what you want to be when you grow up, just what you want to do next." So please join us on our next podcast at Dauntless. And thanks again, Yvette.
Thank you.